Oh, hi. Hello there. Fancy meeting you here. It's Grey Ghost. Welcome back to my channel. It's been a minute. Now, why would you even be here right now? Well, I've been asking myself that for a while, but some of you decided to stick around, which is pretty crazy to me, but there you are. I've even picked up subscribers, somehow. So, I'm compelled to at least attempt and upload every once in a while, because that's really the thing that drove me away from it, is that I have a job, okay? Like, I have to work and to feed myself. So, as it often does, it kind of got in the way of the things that I consider hobbies. So, moving forward, I can't really say for certain that I'm back, in air quotes, or anything like it. All the stuff that implies. But I'll try to upload every once in a while, just because I do miss it. I do miss engaging with these sorts of things. I mean, I love talking about Total War. I love talking about Warhammer. The conversations that we've struck up in the comments of some of my videos have been really, really insightful. And especially now that we've seen the sum total of the first release of Warhammer and now the second, moving into the third, it's a pretty good time for me to come back. Like, I missed the important bit that I wanted to be a part of, but I mean, look at what we got here now. We got Skaven with fully automatic weapons, cannons, ranged equipment of all types, heavy weapons, lots of heavy weapons. I mean, it's a portrayal of Total War that I didn't really expect to see, to be honest. I mean, this is so close to modern warfare that you can see it. I'm sure you can all see it. Like, just the amount of suppressing fire coming from that Skaven line. It may as well be an MG42, you know? I mean, come on. Howitzer positions up on the cliffs. These are your Russian conscripts. I digress. I'm here to talk about Warhammer, not all the potential that the Total War franchise itself has, even though I will be getting into that in a later video. Today, I just want to talk about the state of the game, where it is now, what we can hope going into Game 3, what we already know is going to happen, and what I kind of expect to happen, based on the lore, and based on just the way that they have rolled out Game 1, Game 2, what can we expect for how they roll out Game 3. First off, when is Game 3? I expect Game 3 will be announced pretty soon. We'll have a title card at least to look over in the near future, just to start building the hype train from the tracks up. And here you see a little bit. By the way, all this B-roll in the background is modded Warhammer Total War 2, SFO, a bunch of other stuff, all bells and whistles. What you're seeing right now is Kislev fighting Chaos with their Dwarven allies. And it's kind of relevant right now, isn't it? Since Game 3, that's going to be the focus, from what we can all tell. It's going to be focused on demons, it's going to be focused on, if not Kislev, then generally what Kislev concerns itself with, namely the Chaos Waste to the north, the influence of Chaos on the Empire, all that good stuff. I mean, look at that big bloodthirster sumbitch. Khorne Berserkers. Just, once CA gives us a genuine interpretation of these units in engine, it's going to blow us all away. I'm sure of that. But until then, you know, we have modders, and that's really all we need until then. But what to expect? What to expect going into Game 3? How can these changes make something distinct from what we've already seen? Now, Kislev is the obvious example of what to talk about for how things get better in Game 3. either from release or as a DLC faction or as the free DLC pre-order faction. Kislev is inevitable just because its culture is so diverse that it sort of necessitates a certain amount of tender love and care that that's more akin to like the Wood Elves or something. That it's more akin to having an entire faction made rather than just updating the Empire, which also needs to happen, but we'll get that out later. We'll get to that later. Norse dwarves as well would also be welcome, having a bit of differentiation between dwarf cultures in that way. But the portrayal of the North right now is very generic. We all know that. We all know that Kislev right now is a shadow of what it is in the lore. So that's the obvious, like I said, that's the obvious thing to expand on in order to make Game 3 something special. The faction of Kislev being made into its own genuine faction. War of Ice, heroes, new units, the whole nine. But Chaos itself could use some updating, and while it's speculated that specific icons and the differentiation between gods will play a large part in the faction through either entirely new faction mechanics or entirely new factions to represent the diversity, so you have like a faction for Khorne, a faction for Nurgle, or it's just a mechanic within the existing faction of Chaos that allows you to differentiate more. But again, that's all speculation. I'm just going over ways that it could be done. Because it's going to be done. I think that's kind of everything, that's what we all agree on, is that the gods will have more of an impact on the game in Game 3 than they have. Which is to say they haven't had much of an impact at all. But the Horde mechanic as well, some form of permanence to Horde factions, I think, would be an interesting way of evolving their features. Chaos, Beastmen, the Orcs, or not the Orcs, really just Chaos and Beastmen, factions that don't have traditional economies. If they had some way of infesting a place, for instance, Chaos having no heresy mechanic to impose on Empire factions is a bit of an oversight, in my opinion. The Chaos narrative in the lore is one of subversion, first and foremost, not always just mindless slaughter. You know, mindless slaughter is on one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is supposed to be subversive. It's supposed to be very sneaky and but none of that is really portrayed in the game as is. It's just the brute force aspects of Chaos. And yeah, that has its place, but you know, that's not all it is all the time. But that being said, the Empire having some way of combating heresy, Chaos having a way of spreading heresy, the game having mechanics based around heresy is something that it desperately needs for that relationship between the Empire and Chaos. And really, that's kind of what the focus of this video is. There's no real mechanic that is completely foreign to the game that I would introduce. Like heresy already sort of exists in the sense that Chaos corruption is a thing. It just needs to be fleshed out a little bit more. Same thing with the Orcs. With the Orcs, you have a faction that is Horde-based. That is the point of them. And while the walk mechanic generates a certain aspect of this philosophy, it fails to actually dig deeper into the narrative reasons why the Orcs function the way they do. So while you can have large groups, large armies of Orcs, it's not right. it's not portrayed properly. Now let me just explain what I mean by that. The WoG mechanic should be explicitly tied to the level of the war boss, or the level of the character in general, just whatever orc hero character you are using to lead the army. The level should dictate, or inform rather, certain aspects of the WoG mechanic on the campaign map. So Grimgore should be generating more fightiness just about the simple fact that he's Grimgore. But to kind of bring that back a little bit, a level 1 war boss should be generating less fightiness than a level 15 war boss. Now, that level 15 war boss should also, whenever it does generate a WoG, that WoG should be made up of higher tier units than the level 1 war boss. Also, the WoG that is spawned from any war boss, there should be potential for that WoG to generate a WoG. Okay? You kind of get into a nesting doll situation there, but that's kind of the point, and that's kind of where I feel like the orc mechanic missteps, is that it stops. You know? It stops. There's a hard cap to how many orc armies are fielded, based on how many armies you already have, and that's not how it should work. It should be, you have one powerful war boss, and if you do not kill that war boss, if you don't stop his fightiness, that war boss will continue to roam around and attract orcs to him. You know, you shouldn't be managing multiple stacks, and then each stack you have just has one additional stack. That's not how this works. You should have one war boss who is generating multiple WoG stacks. And like I said, those stacks should be dictated, and it should be informed by the traits and level of the war boss manifesting those WoGs. This expands on the campaign mechanic in a way that gives longevity. Multiple turns, dozens of turns in, you see the progress of a WoG as a system. It's not just a one-off system that can happen in a turn, and then you have one army, and that's the end of it, you know? Like, a WoG should be like the Jihad of Medieval 2, like that mechanic, or the Crusade mechanic. There should be some narrative hook to it, first off, through campaign story events, where you're doing stuff diplomatically with other orc factions, even. Or maybe your WoG buff is influenced by your diplomatic standing with other orc factions, and maybe retooled the orc diplomacy to be based around the battle performance of the orc armies, not even like traditional diplomacy standards. Something like that. Like, all of the systems that exist in the game as they already exist to portray the faction as they rightfully should be. It's just they need to take that extra step to actually do it. All the ones and zeros are there. They just need to flip the appropriate switches, basically. And it's similar with something like the Beastmen. The Beastmen have Bray herds, and it's a similar mechanic where Bray herds need to be dangerous, and they don't feel dangerous right now. They feel like just an added mechanic that's a sidestep to the rest of the faction. Where you have factions like the Undead that have entire mechanics based around building their armies with the raising of the dead. It's an opportunity mechanically to kind of cross-pollinate mechanics with certain factions, much the same way that the dwarf mechanic of the Underway, the way that that's been adopted by the Beastmen, the Wood Elves, the Skaven, you know, the Orcs, like, they all have access to this reskinned mechanic that's just called something different. Having access to something in the Beastmen roster similar to Raising the Dead, I think would be an interesting concept. Now, it wouldn't just be, you know, one for one the undead mechanic raising the dead, because that mechanic makes sense how it is. But in order for the beastman mechanic to make sense, within the context of the campaign, there's something much like how Chaos and the Empire have a relationship that is narratively very important. The beastmen and the Empire also have a pretty narratively important relationship, and that is the beastmen infest the forests of man. This is how they survive and breed and populate their armies. It's important to portray this, in my opinion. And you would do that by giving the beastmen the ability to encamp, but when they encamp, they can build a special lodestone or gathering stone or something for basically setting up a breeding ground. So that stack then becomes permanent. The permanency of this encampment gives benefits on the campaign map, gives benefits that a traditional city would kind of give, but, you know, obviously they're beastmen, so it can't be one for one a city. But, you know, things like more population, or not population, but more recruitment slots, more building choices for income and faction-wide buffs and that sort of thing. But the simple fact that you could set them up anywhere, and you should set them up in forests, kind of simulates a beastman taking over the forest kind of scenario. So if you don't send out patrols into the Drakewald, you might have beastman encampments that are growing out of control, and one day soon they're gonna come at that forest and they're gonna fuck your shit up. You know, that's just how it's gonna be. And again, that's a narrative thing that the Empire is supposed to be focusing on. It's something that as an Empire player you should be worried about, because that's how it is for the Empire in the lore. You should be worried about beastmen. You should be worried about beastmen infesting forests, specifically, I should say. You should be worried about that. You should be worried when there are too many orcs in the Badlands. You should be worried when the vampire counts are moving west, you know? Like, there are little telltale signs in the lore where it's like, okay, this is a sign that things are bad, and this is a sign that the narrative of the game is shifting. You know, when the orcs are coming through Blackfire Pass, everything else you were doing doesn't matter anymore. The story is now about the Empire holding off the orcs at Blackfire Pass. You know? Like, there needs to be more of those types of things, because that's the point of the Empire. You're beset on all sides by these horrible forces, and these horrible forces need to be more dangerous, because right now the Grey Herd mechanic, the Wog mechanic, they're not dangerous as they should be. They're just a game mechanic. They're balanced, and I say that as a curse word because the game, Warhammer, it's not really supposed to be balanced in a way, and I feel like the developers are kind of understanding that with the introduction of Ikit Claw and, like, nukes in the campaign. Like, they understand that game balance doesn't necessarily mean fun. As long as you preserve balance for multiplayer, I don't care. Like, that's all that matters. That's the only place that balance matters is in multiplayer. In single player, give me nukes. Give me nukes. Give me 100% upkeep reduction on zombies. You know? Let me build permanent beastmen encampments and flood the world in beastmen. It doesn't, like, as long as it's fun, that's the point. Like, that's the thing that matters most, is it fun? And it is fun. Let's be real. Like, most of these mechanics, like, there's nothing about this game that isn't fun, to be honest. Like, they've done a stellar job so far, and everything that I'm suggesting isn't required to make a fun game out of Game 3. It's just, it would be nice to see some of the Game 1 factions get a little love. Except for the undead. The undead have been getting a lot of love. The undead are in a good spot right now. As far as the game is concerned, mechanically speaking, they're in a pretty good spot. The Empire, though, is not. The Empire needs a pretty drastic update. Empire counties, Electra Count heroes fleshed out, knightly orders, different offices, different campaign mechanics, campaign events that you have to deal with, all kinds of stuff. Like, there's so many things that could be added to the Empire to flesh it out. Here you see some Knights of the Bull. Like I said, this is my modded game, so if it looks better, it's because it is. Because while CA did a great job, there's still obviously room for improvement, which is true of every game. But, you know, Knights of the Bull, Secular Order Knights, Knights of Sigmar, all kinds of stuff are easy ways of introducing elements to the Empire that are sorely needed. And while it's pretty straightforward as far as with the Secular Knight idea in particular, you're just adding a bunch of heavy cavalry units, you know? They're just reskinning heavy cav and messing with stats. It does a lot. It actually does a lot to have that unit choice, you know? Like, even if Knights of the Bull and Knights of the Griffin are pretty much the same stat-wise, it's still something that matters to me, whether or not I'm fielding the Knights of the Bull or the Knights of the Griffin. Or, I don't even know if Knights of the Griffin is a thing. But, you get my point. So, who else? We've already talked about... Well, I mean, let's go back to Empire for a second. The Empire needs a way through either diplomacy or Inquisitor actions to deal with heresy, like I was saying earlier. The point of Karl Franz being the Emperor is that his duty is to keep the Empire together, is to keep them as one unified front, to keep everybody safe. If diplomacy is failing and Empire factions are fighting each other, the Emperor has failed. That is a failure of Franz himself, and you as a player. At least that should be the implication of it. There shouldn't be... Like, early game Empire far too often is me playing Reichland and me fighting other Empire counties to unite them, which is ridiculous. That's not how it should be when faced with figuring out how to deal with other humans around you. Bretonia, maybe, but not other Empire counties. That's kind of ridiculous. I mean, really, that's kind of the bulk of the Empire's changes, as far as I see them. Mechanically speaking, it all pretty much makes sense. They're just missing a lot of their more interesting units, and a lot of their more interesting personalities, like the Elector Counts, and the counties themselves being fleshed out, like I said. Pretty good fix. Maybe something like the food mechanic, an engineer's workshop, akin to the Tomb King's mortuary cult, to build items and special units and upgrades. Something like Ikkal's workshop even could be included for the dwarves and the Empire, considering their engineering background. As far as wood elves are concerned, I don't even know, really. Like, wood elves are the ones I'm most unfamiliar with from the game, and like, I love watching them. Like, they're great on the screen. They're fun to play with. They're horribly annoying to fight against, but that's kind of the point of fighting a skirmish army. I mean, really, the Wood Elves could benefit from some terraforming magic of some kind. That would be the only thing I would like to see from them. Because so many of their units rely on fighting in the forest, or fighting in terrain, like just even the simple fact that they are a range-heavy army means that terrain is very important to them. Unit placement is very important to them. So something to influence these things would be appreciated, as far as maybe generating a patch of forest to give your Ents some buffs, to use their natural, their prowess of fighting in the woods. You can proc that, basically, by dropping a stash of a forest, or whatever. Long grass for cover for your wardens, or your Way Watchers, I mean. Just little stuff like that, I suppose, would be an interesting way of fleshing out the game mechanics. The campaign itself, with Amber and building outposts, is also a little lackluster. So the idea of spreading the forest should be emphasized. So they should have a playstyle that emphasizes very slow expansion, but my god, when they actually get their claws into a piece of territory, they do not let it go. I would like to see movement reduction, massive attrition, all kinds of terrible, terrible stuff. But in order to actually build up the steam to steamroll, it takes a lot. It should be one of the most slow start campaigns there, if not the slow start campaign definitively of the entire game. Because they should be monsters when they actually get going, but the fact that I can spam archers right out the gate and pretty much I'm good, you know? Like, I get it, but it doesn't really feel right. Like, that's what a lot of this video is like how it feels rather than what it mechanically actually plays out as. Because while these sorts of mechanics are all pretty simple little tweaks can ripple out through the game mechanics. So, like, turn to turn, these small little decisions that you make, these small little ways of viewing the game, they compound after 100 turns into something that's a lot more special. Like Crusade, for instance, you know? Like, if a Bretonnian faction calls Crusade, and they respond, and then they go spend 20 turns sailing over the ocean, sailing across the ocean into territory that is foreign to them, and they have a huge battle, riches, bring it home, all die, whatever happens, like, that's 30 turns of a story based off of one very simple mechanic. It's the Crusade mechanic. Or a Crusade mechanic, considering that it doesn't actually exist. But that's what Total War is good at, because it's sequential. It is a sequential storyline, because it is turn-based. 1 turn, 2 turn, 3 turn, and you very clearly can track events that happen throughout your turns, throughout your campaign. And this should be leaned into. That's kind of what they're doing in Three Kingdoms Total War, and the game is immeasurably better because of it. But these story beats that you lean into, such as Crusades, or if you're playing the Empire, Sylvania uprising, or Kislev falling, Marienburg reclaiming, just all these little things that narratively matter, should have more presence in the timeline of the campaign. They should give you decisions as a player. So, like, things like this, where you have the Knights of Eregio. Not a playable faction in the game, in the base game. Without mods, you can't have this sort of experience where you're playing as the Bretonnians fighting the Tomb Kings. That's a very rare occurrence in the stock game because of the start positions of those factions. Very rarely will you have Tomb Kings fighting Bretonnia, unless you have something like this, where you are either able to play as them from the beginning, or you have some sort of mechanic that drives these factions together. Very obviously, a Crusade mechanic, some sort of Crusade mechanic, would be amazing to drive different faction pairs together in order to make interesting combat situations. Now, Tomb Kings is a good example of the Game 2 factions getting lots of love. They are so well portrayed. They are so dangerous. They're so much fun to watch on the screen. It's just that we need to get back to the Game 1 factions because they need that kind of love as well. If you have like the dwarves, desperate. The fact that the mortuary cult was a thing, and let me restart. The fact that the mortuary cult was a thing before a dwarven engineer guild system was a thing boggles my mind. The fact that the Empire has access to nearly all lores of magic, but the elves have access to what, like 3? Same with the Legionmen? Makes absolutely no sense. Little things like that are huge for the longevity and the meta of the game. But I won't even get into meta. I'm not really that big into the meta of the game. It's more about single-player campaign and lore for me. And mods. Let's be honest here. If you know anything about this channel, you know we're all about the mods here. So, while Game 1 factions and Game 2 factions could use a little bit of love going into Game 3, Game 1 factions definitely need it the most. Bretonia has had some updates recently, and they're in a pretty good place as well. Really, all human factions could benefit from a diplomacy update akin to what we're kind of seeing with Three Kingdoms. Maybe not one for one, but certainly more options would be appreciated when dealing with other humans, as it does make narrative sense. You know, naturally we don't want to deal with orcs in the same way that we deal with our humanly neighbors, but you know, some form of that would be appreciated. But with the Game 1 factions, aside from mechanically things that need to change, you're really just looking at a long list of hero characters. Like you have the Brass Bull, Torox, the Brass Bull from the Beastmen, Boris Todbringer for the Empire. It's, there was that one particular, Hobgoblin Khan for the orcs. You know, like there's so many character units that could still be introduced, and so many units that are one-offs, basically. Like the Karaberg Great Swords or the Altdorf Honor Company. Like there's mentions in passing, almost, and they're so unique as to be just, you know, they may as well not even be included just because they're so rare. Like, to actually see them on the field is a 1 in 100 thing. Or 1 in a million thing, rather. But the idea that you can just add units and make the game what it needs to be is also wrong-headed. It needs to be both of these things. They need to focus on adding things that mechanically matter, like a heresy mechanic, like updated wogs, like infesting forests, beastmen, on and on. But they also need those units. They also need those missing Empire State troops. They need those missing lords, elector counts, all that. Now, also siege maps. As you can see in this custom Helmgart map, the actual environments that you fight in are as important as all the things that are happening mechanically. Like, you can't just put all of this on any old map and have it work. Much like the tabletop game, terrain features and map setup make or break certain engagements as it pertains to the armies involved. For instance, if I'm playing, or if I'm fielding a shooting heavy army, a ranged heavy army on the tabletop game, then where those terrain features are placed is critical to how I'm going to play that match. And 9 times out of 10, a combination of where terrain features go and what turn I get to move, those two things dictate who wins and who loses 9 times out of 10. It is a lot of luck as far as those things are concerned. If those things are taken out of your hands, then it gets a little more even, and it gets a little more about tactics. But maps are the big portion of it, and I kind of get what they were going for with the siege battles of Warhammer Total War, where it was like, alright guys, we need to make a balanced game. Sieges in previous titles were sluggish, they were just a meat grinder, and it was just like a series of choke point holding, basically, is what it boiled down to. But the response to that was worse. The response to that was to make it just one big rush. You know, like, let's just rush the walls, let's give everybody pocket ladders and call it a day. Even though it doesn't really make sense. And even though, more importantly, it's not fun. This is fun. The Battle of Helmgard has been fun. The Battle of Altdorf with an actual city to run around in is fun. These portioned off siege maps has to change. It absolutely must change. That is, if you take away anything from this video, and I'm sure that it's a fairly obvious change, because everybody agrees that the siege maps in Warhammer Total War are dog shit. They are so bad, they are not fun at all. It's not exactly a genius concept to say, you know, hey, this needs to change. Duh, obviously it needs to change. I'm pretty sure CI already knows that. That being said, how do you change it? With all the systems in the engine as they are, is there a way to genuinely change them for the better? Well, as you can see, yes. There are plenty of assets in the game already. Custom map makers are putting them together with amazing results. But the actual system of sieges could also change a little bit. One simple change. Get rid of pocket ladders. Get rid of pocket ladders and give Skaven the ability to climb walls, thus giving them, and also spider units. Any unit, basically any unit that is supposed to be able to climb well, those are the units that can just traverse walls without siege towers. That's what makes them special, you know? None of this pocket ladder nonsense. If you want to create a siege item where, you know, you have ladders, like in Medieval 2, makes sense. Seems fine, let's do it. But you don't have to do it. One little change that. Change the towers, the range, the damage. And, like, really just those two changes in vanilla sieges would be infinitely better in my opinion. Actually forcing the attacker to utilize siege equipment. Maybe bring back sap points. That would be interesting. More siege equipment variation would be interesting. And also burning down cities. Like, the fact that I can play as Chaos and I can't burn down cities on the battle map is ridiculous to me. Like, I played Attila, okay? If I can roleplay Attila the Hun and feel more like a Chaos Warrior as Attila than I can as an actual Chaos Warrior, then something is wrong, you know? I should be able to shoot a fireball at a city and catch a building on fire. Like, yeah, that's what I was expecting when everything was announced, but, you know, easy come, easy go. And just like Attila, having some form of battle-wide effect for something like that would be an interesting concept, and just another way of varying up sieges. But like I said, just a couple of ideas. Just wanted to bounce them off of you. Let's see what you think in the comments. Yeah, just to recap: Empire, counties, uniqueness, fleshed out with each individual county, electric counts, all that good stuff. Beastmen having some form of permanence inside of forests to spread the herd kind of thing, kind of idea. Same with chaos, a way of setting up somewhere would be appreciated. A heresy mechanic between the Empire and chaos as a form of, like, secondary struggle between the two. having to deal with Empire counties falling to chaos as the Empire would be really fun. Changing up the greenskins to have a more in-depth WoG mechanic that's more characterized by the decisions that you make and the story that your individual war bosses have on the campaign, turn to turn, would be the best way, in my opinion. Dwarves really would benefit most from siege changes, like having cracks that actually reflect the genius of their siege engineering would be the only real way I can think of to improve on them. Yeah, all around, just siege mechanic siege mechanic changes desperately needed. What else? Wood Elves, their campaign could use a bit of a change, like I said. Did I miss any factions? Undead, they're pretty good. Like, they got a lot of love recently. They got their specific bloodlines. That's cool. Really, just even expanding on that would be nice. Yeah, just, I mean, little things like that. Little subtle changes that can go a long way whenever you stretch them out over like 100 turns on a Total War campaign. But that's really all I wanted to say, guys. If you have any ideas, let me know down in the comments. It's really good to be back. And like I said, I may not even be back, really. I'll just do what I can for you guys, because I enjoy this, like I said, and I hope to enjoy it more in the future. So, yeah, be looking forward to uploads. I'll probably start some Three Kingdoms stuff here in a little while. Maybe another couple videos on the future of Total War, and like maybe something. Probably my next video is going to be about 40k Total War and why it's absolutely possible and why it would absolutely be amazing. But until then, thank you for joining me. I've been Grey Ghost, and I will see you all later. Thanks, guys.